Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt.
And I'm Eric.
And this week, The Crow is bringing us back into talking about movies. No, I'm just kidding. There is no good segue, probably because these movies, for one of us, this movie was okay. And for one of us, this movie was soul crushing.
Not okay.
Yes, soul crushing. But we are going to be looking. This is both. This week's episode is about The Crow, both the Bill Skarsgård version that was foisted upon audiences starting Friday, and the classic Brandon Lee film that came out 30 years ago. It is hard to believe. Much like Forrest Gump has been running for 30 years. Ricky's favorite movie of all time.
Absolutely.
The Crow.
No bigger Forrest Gump fan do I know.
Yeah, than our own Ricky Valero. By the way, this might be the last time either of us appears on anything related to the Music City Drive-In. No. So we will start with the 2024 version, and in this version of the film, which says that it is based on the same source material and the graphic novel comic book strip from James O'Barr. But this one, if you saw the original, you might be thinking, which one follows the source material more closely? I would say it's not this new version, which has some interesting choices. Danny Houston is a bad guy, gangster. They don't ever actually super explain what he does or what his power is, but it's heavily implied he's made some kind of deal with the devil and is something akin to a demon. And he is trying to track down a young woman named Shelley, played by FKA Twigs, who was involved in some shady dealings with him, put it on video, and whose friend decided to send that video out for reasons surpassing understanding. So Shelley makes sure she gets arrested and popped for drug possession so that she can get sent to a rehab facility. And there she meets a loner named Eric, who has a lot of delightful tattoos and a very scarring past. We see an early hint of his past as the film opens, but we don't actually, I guess, learn that much about him either. But they quickly bond, and to the point that when her past comes looking for her, they decide to escape together. They have a kind of torrid, fiery romance over the course of a couple of days until things catch up with them and they both get murdered. The end. No, that's not
the end.
So they get thrown. Eric ends up in kind of a middle way station that looks an awful lot like a defunct set of train tracks with patches of water and a lot of crows. And because he was a good person, I guess, they nebulously don't explain the concept. For a movie that I'm about to say I kind of liked, I'm realizing how many
you're pointing out a lot of stuff
you could drive through. He gets the power of the crow brings him back so he can avenge and right the wrongs as long as his love remains pure. He goes through some difficult periods there, but gets popped up, and then we get a third act that is quite violent. And ends in a sort of weird place. And I didn't totally understand what happened at the end, but it seemed nice. I will say...
You hit all the points in this description.
I'm going to give this a mild thumbs up because I, in general, liked some of the visual style, which was as surprising to me as anyone because Rupert Sanders is the director here. He did Snow White and the Huntsman, a movie that I thought was fairly banal and horrific. That's probably more well known for the off the screen affair that happened than anything on the screen. He also did Ghost in the Shell, which I remember that having a lot of off-screen controversy, I think due to casting issues.
A very poignant thing to point out about Ghost in the Shell is the idea of, oh no, we're not whitewashing the character, and she's not going to play a Japanese character.
Well, we did pick Scarlett Johansson instead.
He did both things he said he wasn't doing. The character was Japanese turned robot white, and it was a whitewash. Like okay. Yep.
So probably not everyone's favorite director, but I will say what probably elevated this a little bit for me is I did genuinely like the connection between Bill Skarsgård and FKA Twigs, and I did like that they spent about 40 minutes kind of building up their story together and their relationship so that you were more bought in, which I would say is a difference for me from the original film where sort of the inciting incident happens right away, which I gather is actually what happens in the comic book source material. So that was going a different way that worked for me. Some of the supernatural things they added were beyond strange, but there were some stylish shots. Some of the way they used the crow flying behind him, some of the looks that they gave to Bill Skarsgård, and actually some of the action sequences that I liked. I know other people may feel differently. I didn't love this movie, but honestly, where Eric and I will differ when we talk about the original is I don't have a great love for the original. So maybe this was more of a surprise for me, that I thought it was more entertaining than I was expecting. It also could be I had seen a whole bunch of new releases that were, in a word, underwhelming before I saw this. So I was like, well, it's not a movie I loved, and I don't think it stands out from the crowd, but a lot of people you will see intensely disliked it, and some people have real valid reasons, and there are real valid plot hole reasons. I didn't love it or hate it. I thought it was entertaining for what it was.
Oh my! Is it my turn? Rupert Sanders. I don't know who he was talking to, but I think it's important because where we are today, the idea of a movie starting with a woman being raped and then seeing a guy kill everyone who had anything to do with it is just quite brutal. ... It's not just blind nihilistic man rage and killing everyone because she died. That was really important to me. And that's why I cast FKA Twigs. She's just such a cipher and so unique and otherworldly. She'd really implant herself in our minds. Then when she went, we'd be really bereft. Therefore, we would go along on the journey with Eric as he fights to bring her back, essentially. The level of horrible lack of insight and lack of self-awareness of how out of touch that makes me think he is with the final product he created and with his intent in creating this final product in the first place is astounding. Thinking of the original O'Malley the Crow graphic novel as anything related to blind nihilistic man rage is so borderline ignorant that it pisses me off. This movie, to me, represented a dangling carrot on a stick where the guy gave one bite of the carrot in the last 15 minutes of the movie and then thinks that's art. So here's the thing. Good things I can say about the movie.
It ended.
No, the ending was...
No, I mean that it was
upsetting.
Over, and you
yes,
don't
I
have
know.
to see it again.
Well, okay. First shot that they show of Eric apparently not Draven, because apparently this is just Eric and Shelley, a different unnamed last named character. So just the first shot they show of Eric, he has longer hair. There's one shot in the movie where he has hair long enough that he would look like the character from the comic, and they just cut it short for everything else. That drove me crazy. Anyways, like 80% of this movie is standard medium, long shot, reverse shot, talking scenes, interspersed with action that has admitted flair in it. And I agree with Ricky's statement that they really did let the character of the Crow not feel like he comes back as some invincible badass, but that he is struggling still as a human being to become something otherworldly and undead. And I loved that progression of undead to fully embodying what being undead is making him. There is a shot, a gorgeous shot of Eric and Shelley together where he's like tracing a handle on her and she actually has goosebumps. They actually got goosebumps on film. It's gorgeous. Shelley absolutely should have been the guy in the train station. She should have had her eyes glazed over white, and she would have been otherworldly and everything he claims Shelley was, but she wasn't in the movie, where clearly they're hanging in the balance there. And here's the thing. What they're nodding to in the reference material is that Death, as a skeletal creature with a hat, is actually a character that interacts and sort of explains a little bit of the structure to Eric Draven on what he is here to do. And so clearly that guy represents this part, but it just from taking that story and deciding to tell the story much more fleshed out, how Eric and Shelley's relationship became so ingrained, it would make so much more sense to have her be hanging in the balance and going back to that place and showing how that moment where he distrusts her would mean so much more if he came back to face her face to face and talk. It's hanging right in front of your face, and they didn't do it. And it drove me crazy.
I honestly think probably one of the biggest things, having not read the comic book, I went back to look what the comic book plot is. And I think probably the biggest disservice they did to the source material was in making her seem responsible for the attack that's foisted upon them and adding the weird, is he a vampire? Is he a demon? I don't know why. That's like a question Rupert Sanders really and the writer need to answer. Why did you choose to create such a radically different? I get the fleshing out their relationship and stuff before, because that's actually something that bothered me about the original story. What I don't get is making those other mammoth changes for it. Never paid off. I kept that is one big criticism that I would level is whatever was going on with Danny Huston, they never really paid off.
And what pisses me off is to hear him reference the original, whatever form he's talking to, as nihilistic man rage, when he could have sacked up and made the Crow Shelley. And she could have been responsible for bringing the evil men into life, and they kill Eric, and that is the injustice that brings her back. Because here's a little fun thing, and I'm just going to go ahead and say like a trigger warning for anyone who's watching this, because I'm going to have to describe a little bit of the plots of the other movies, and I don't want to just mention something that horribly like upsets someone. So just stop watching if you don't want to hear about horrible tragedy in any form. The line from the first movie that gets echoed and repeated in this movie and every sequel is that sometimes something so bad happens that a soul can't be at rest, and the Crow brings that soul back from the dead to put the wrong things right. So you have a almost married couple who have built a life together where a man is thrown out a window, a woman is gang raped to death and dies in the hospital after 30 hours of anguishing pain. That is horrific. You then have a man and his son, unable to defend his tiny, innocent son, gets killed, and he comes back to defend his son. Then you have a man who is wrongfully convicted for the murder of his own girlfriend and is put to death for killing her while the bad guys are getting away with it. Then you have, even in the shittiest movie that is way worse than this movie that is in theaters, you still have a woman who is ritual sacrificed and her eyes cut out and all of these horrible things. In this movie, and this is the thing, I'll say, for spending so much time in their relationship and how great FKA Twigs was and how great Bill Skarsgård was in this, they decided to change the relationship's nature to just starting. Like, I do believe that maybe we go like a month into their relationship because they spend quite a bit of time together, like on the run without really running anywhere, but whatever. But the thing about flashing back in the original Crow is that the glimpses you get of them are not necessarily about them falling in love. It's about them living a life they had built together. They were going to get married. And so it's like you feel that loss. And in this movie, I don't understand what made this death so tragic that versus other tragic things that are happening in the world, that this man is the one who was brought back to the dead from the dead as the Crow. So that's really nitpicky. I think it's absolutely like fine to just take it as is, but they really brings it down to my core issue, and that is a man, James O'Barr, lost his wife to a drunk driver and poured that grief into images and poetry and literature, into a character that is in anguish and can't be at rest because he can't get over his grief. And there is no happy ending in that book, because that's all it is raw processing hatred and grief and loss. He was not satisfied when he finished that book. It gained popularity and attraction, but he's not at peace with that until Brandon Lee comes along, takes that story, writes a movie about it where the characters, it's a little bit more about that he's there because love persists. And there's a little bit more cheese in this movie than is in the graphic novel. And that's because they wanted to layer in this girl who is an orphan from the graphic novel, had like a mentor, like relationship connection, friendship with Eric and Shelley, and she lives on and misses them and cares for them and takes care of their graves and things. And he wants to save her life instead of just fighting for death in the end. So there's this weird tonal pivot in the third act of the movie where all of a sudden she gets kidnapped in a church and he's fighting bad guys on a roof. But the whole thing is that they take that narrative that is hopeless and anguish and loss and turn it to love and peace and a resolution where Shelley Webster comes to Eric Draven at his grave and embraces him, and you know that they're going to be together in a hopeful afterlife. And so the writer of this original material finally had something that represented his work, but gave him some peace. Then Brandon Lee died making it. And that is like a horrible gut punch. And to even talk about any part of that process as just someone's nihilistic man rage, like clearly the whole reason that it is from the man and violence perspective is because the writer lost his wife and she's gone and he has this rage and anguish in him. So he's going to write from his perspective. If you're going to make this movie, I don't understand why anyone would not make Shelley with this story the figure to come back as the Crow. It seems very bizarre to me. You're either muted or
they're not afraid, obviously, to make some radical changes to the story. So you do raise an interesting point if that was.
So there is the thing. And I honestly wish I had said this to you more often while the movie was coming out, was, do you know what this movie is not going to have? Is a horse trapped in barbed wire. And what I mean by that is that there is an aside, because the movie is such a hodgepodge of like ideas and moments. Like there is a narrative of people that are dying like one by one, but there is a moment where he is on a train and he is staring and he's watching a fully white horse march across an open field. And it's like, in my interpretation, it's this like innocence that is corrupt, strangled, and destroyed by a man-made barbaric structure. And so you see like a little bit of just like, how horrible is this thing that this is what happens in the world. And so when this movie opened up with a horse trapped in barbed wire, I was freaking out. I was like, okay, so clearly they've gone back to the source material. Clearly they've pulled some things. Clearly they were looking in the right directions trying to come up with this. And then in the last 15 minutes of the movie, there is one maybe 30-second clip where it is everything I think a Crow movie should be. Where Danny Huston is whispering in his ear and doing some stupid supernatural, make him go into a trance thing. But the trance he goes into is a beautiful collage of the pain he's felt, where we learned that like his home got burned down for the first time. Some reason we're learning that. And he's suffering in his death and watching the best moments of his life with Shelley and the worst moments of his life collide together. And we see that horse free from the barbed wire for the first time in a moment where he's transcending something, and it's done without exposition and non-verbally, and it was one of the most gorgeous things in the world, and it made me so angry because all that happens is the guy just like pops back to life and then punches a guy in the face, and then CGI water demon sucks him into the earth.
Well, the good news for you, the guy that wrote this new Crow screenplay has written some kind of Silent Hill sequel that I'm sure will make you equally as disappointed.
I'm sure it will be very exposition-y and a whole bunch of just two people talking, and then every once in a while something pops up. But like, so here's the thing. This is a guy, I mentioned this before, Rupert Sanders said Ghost in the Shell was going to be something, but it wasn't. He says he didn't want to just do blind nihilistic man rage and I know I'm harping on that line, but just like the brutal violence. He says there's brutality in the movie, but you had to establish this beautiful young couple who were so in love and so in need of each other. Yeah, did you have to have that couple so that you would care about the brutality of just a bunch of opera house workers? Like, the brutality of every single Crow movie, even the worst one, is about the character getting revenge on the people directly responsible for what happened to him. And yes, there are a bunch of people who get caught on the wayside, but usually the people who die represent people who bring evil into other people's lives. They're either drug peddlers or they're just like gunmen for hire or rapists or something like that. Like, there's this suggestion that if he's killing a large group of people, it's because they are all directly associated with the evil that brought tragedy into the Crow's life. I hated that opera house scene, except for the part where he throws the heads into the crowd. I got a kick out of that. And partially that was just because of that moment where Shelley's in the audience.
What about like when he goes to see his friend and his friend tries to help him and his friend just gets shot in the face and he doesn't seem to care about that? And who was this friend?
In a movie that is way more about the Crow would have led Eric to that guy's house, and it would be unclear why. And when he got there, he would have some sort of recognition or vision that maybe this guy is the guy who supplied FKA Twigs with her drugs, and maybe this is the same guy who ratted out her location and got her killed. And that is the kind of thing that would be in this movie. And then it's just not there. And then instead, he gets shot, and one of the weirdest things happens in the movie where the guy just has his bathtub full for some reason, so that he could come out. He was
thinking about taking a bath in an hour or two.
He was thinking about taking a bath, but when it's nice and cold after it's been sitting for a while. Like,
it wasn't a tub of ice because he was going to store a body, but he died, so it melted. I don't know.
Yeah, like, I was thinking something that occurred to me. If you want to watch a modern day movie that gets the spirit of revenge that should be in a movie like The Crow, 2011's Girl with a Dragon Tattoo is very close to the tone that I think should be in like what I would describe as like an A24-esque like monster horror kind of thing.
The Fincher version of Girl with the Dragon.
The Fincher version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It's particularly the plot thread with Lisbeth Salander and her rapist and that kind of thing. It's like, that is very what is here. And to hear that this director misunderstood it so horribly, but to see that like the writers or someone involved got so close to understanding it, it just made the whole movie
Well, that's kind of a question then that I have, because he's not credited in any way as a writer.
No, whoever the writer is. I'm saying the director and whoever the writer is.
No, like, so the weird going off the rails with the story and stuff. Sanders may be verbally defending it, but I went and looked. He's not credited with story or writing. There are 2 credited writers on here.
Yeah, it's painful because Bill Skarsgård clearly put so much into it. And in that little window where he goes to face Danny Houston, he is perfect as the character. And to just have that little carrot bite to wade through the rest of this and then to just to have the reaction of it to be that like everyone hates the movie because it's not this and because it was this and whatever other reasons. And like I understand that. I like if I didn't have such a strong feeling for what I think the purpose of artistic expression was of the original graphic novel, I probably wouldn't have this strong of a reaction. And I am only going to give it one thumb down because I think there are people who will have a good time watching it. But I hated this more than I think Madam Web is a worse movie, but I hated watching this more than I hated watching Madam Web.
I actually didn't mind Madam Web.
You didn't mind this either.
Well, yeah, I guess that's fair. I liked Madam Web. Well, no, I guess I agree about the same.
Okay.
I mean, there are things that I intensely dislike. One of them is getting a sequel in October. So the rage you feel now, I will probably have on October 5th when we talk about.
Oh, I'm so ready for it.
I rewatched the original and
which thing is coming out in October? I don't.
Joker.
Have you seen all the stuff where Todd Phillips is kind of trying to dance away and claim that it's not a musical? I'm so excited. I'm so excited because I feel like it's going to be a train wreck.
Oh, it will be. So, obviously, you're not a fan of the new one for a lot of reasons, but it is the 30th anniversary of the original, which is kind of a fascinating and heartbreaking story all of its own because of what happened to Brandon Lee, who was tragically killed on set when he was shot with a real bullet filming. Kind of has always cast a little bit of a pallor over the film, but funny enough, when we were preparing, because we saw that this new one was coming out, and I'm like, I'll rewatch the original one. It was upon actually watching it for the first time back in March that I realized the movie I thought of as The Crow is, I think you said, is City of Angels, because it has Mia Kirshner in it. So yeah. I had never actually seen the actual one. I must have seen the sequel and associated that. But not having a big connection, obviously never read the source material, and you can tell that you not only read it, but it sparked great passion in you. I thought this was fine. I actually, in some ways, like the newer version because it builds that relationship out, and I didn't really understand watching the original film with the little kid and all of what was happening and some of the flow. I actually liked Ernie Hudson's character, but I didn't totally understand what he had to do with anything either. But I know, so it never meant as much to me, but I can tell it was a movie that really resonated with you. So I wanted to give you a chance to, I believe we've said it's streaming on Prime Video for those that want to go check it out. But what kind of stood out to you? What drew you to the world of The Crow?
Well, I was an anxious and angry child and very judgmental of a lot of people. And, I once saw the worst Crow movie of all time, Wicked Prayer, the fourth one with Edward Furlong. And it was just on TV and I had no idea what it was. But because I had no idea what the IP was, I was fascinated. Watching that movie blind to the whole purpose, I just watched the movie and all of a sudden there's a girl who's like dying and a dude who gets hung and thrown into a refrigerator, and then he busts out of the refrigerator and puts makeup on his face and goes to kill people. I was hooked. I don't know what that was wild to me.
So Hollywood, if you're out there, take note. A guy that comes out of a refrigerator with makeup, and Eric will be there on opening night.
There you go. But no, like the thing is like so that movie was already like and like weird and of course it's awful in comparison to like anything. But it made me learn what a friend of mine had been explaining to me before. Like I had heard of The Crow before. So I sought out the original movie. I'm going to say streaming, but this is before streaming was a thing. And
Kids, there was these places called Blockbuster where
no. It was the internet. It was I think the first time I saw The Crow, it was in 9 parts on YouTube. Because
wow,
YouTube's copyright restrictions. Yeah, I was fascinated by it. I just want to make sure I didn't watch it out of order. It's like trying to load up different reels.
You know what? That doesn't always hurt you. I saw Elektra in theaters and realized the second and third reel were out of order when everything went back, and I was like, you know, it didn't fundamentally injure my ability to follow this movie, which is not a great sign.
Yeah. So just the gothic aesthetic, between. Some people are really down on iRobot, but between this and iRobot and Dark City, Alex Proyas, I just really like him and as a director, and he clearly cared a ridiculous amount about this. The characters are all like fascinating and gross. That actor, he was in Nope, and he's like the bad guy in the Three Musketeers movie. He was a bad guy in the 90s all over the place. What's his name?
Michael Wincott.
Michael Wincott is amazing. And his speech, I was rewatching this movie, his speech on how there's an idea and that idea becomes an institution speaks so much to the legacy of these movies to me. That there is an idea and it has become a commercial institution. And when you make something that is just supposed to have commercial appeal, you lose the spirit of the idea. I know he's going on a rant about how everyone should burn down the buildings and rape people and do horrible things. But he is so energetic and interesting as a bad guy. And then just Brandon Lee at his core. Like I would draw him all the time. I wanted to have like long hair. Like I wanted to do this. I more than once dressed up as the Crow, and those pictures are seeding somewhere online. And and then I read the original graphic novel and looked at how much of a labor of love the movie was in getting it made. And I just kept researching like why, like what the relationship was. I learned about what happened with Brandon Lee and it is a movie that was made in the 90s. And if you look at that movie alongside other movies made in the 90s, like if you watch Lethal Weapon and then this, then you kind of like see what is just a product of you have to have a blockbuster movie in the 90s. And then you see everything on top of that. And everything on top of that is just this original, amazing, dark sort of idea. And that clearly had so much like care put into it. For example, I saw the movie first on YouTube. Then I saw it on DVD. So I actually didn't know until about 2 years ago that they actually went to painstaking lengths to put a crack in Brandon Lee's face that goes under one eyeball and over his nose, which is from the graphic novel. The character has one eye discolored and it has a scar. Yeah. I actually didn't even know that was in the movie until seeing it on Blu-ray and seeing it on like a high definition TV. And then in like 2 shots, because they went to the painstaking work to do this, but then like it wasn't to show it off on screen. You can see that he has tied bullet casings in his hair that he's used in the movie, which is another thing from the character that I never knew was actually in the movie and was screen accurate to the character. It's just like the whole presence of Brandon Lee, particularly like Gideon's pawn shop and when he's facing off with Fun Boy, and the music by Graham Revel. Like, of course, this is a time in the 90s. We've talked about this before, like with Twisters and everything, where the music is always telling you what to feel. Like, it's so good. And it just, I don't think that the movie is like sacred. I think there are plenty of issues with it. Tony Todd is great, but he's just there. I don't like the whole, well, the crow is his secret power, so if you kill the crow, then you take away the power of the man, and trying to put like these rules and structure on it. And there's so many goofy things that happen. Like I was saying, the thing is like an anti-smoking ad for a bit, where he's like, you shouldn't smoke these, they'll kill you. And they have like cheery moment at the end. But yeah, Ernie Hudson is great. And I think the reason they fleshed out his character so much was to have someone on the ground who's like the fish out of water trying to make sense of things, because they had originally shot scenes with the death skull guy who was like supposed to be telling him about things to do. Like when he's on top of the building and he's playing music and then gets mad and destroys his guitar. One of the scenes is supposed to be there, and they took that away. And so I think Ernie Hudson is supposed to be for the audience to kind of look at it and go like, like, wow, that's weird. Like, I think he does a great job at being that person. I love the little moment they have in the house where he's like, you're dead, man. And he's like, you still have your hat on. And like, it's just goofy little things. I don't know. Like, there's heart all over that movie, inside and out of it. And in this movie, they were just like, well, we really care about the relationship, but also, wouldn't it be cool if a dude put like a sword in a guy's mouth and then like made him a Pez dispenser? Like what? But we're not talking about the new movie anymore. That's why I appreciate The Crow. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, because it is so like, on the one hand, Batman 1989 came out 5 years before it, so it's not the most unique thing ever, but it is really unique, and I don't think anything will ever quite stand up, because even a movie that does a good job adapting the source material of The Crow, it's not going to be this, because this was a branch off of that, trying to put something loving into something that was full of hate and grief. So I don't think it's sacred or anything, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna need to take a breath. I've been talking a lot this episode. I'm like, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's tough when it's a movie that you really like and you're both excited and nervous to see what they do, and it doesn't turn out the way. We've seen that with a few nostalgia plays this year. Some of them have panned out. I think we both enjoyed Twisters, which had just enough nostalgia for the first one while making its own thing. But there have been plenty of examples where you didn't need to go back to revisit, and maybe that's the case here with this film.
Or just make Shelley the Crow.
Then you wouldn't have had this cool shot.
Oh right. Whoops. Sorry. Yeah. Goodness gracious.
So, well, we will leave the world of The Crow behind, and we will actually leave the world of cinema behind. We will be coming to you a little bit earlier next Sunday, and we will be moving from the big screen to the small screen. There was a tiny, tiny little show, hardly anyone heard about it or saw it, called House of the Dragon that premiered way back in June. It wrapped up at the beginning of August. We wanted to give a couple of weeks to make sure everybody had time to finish it, because we will be diving into full spoilers. I am also going to attempt to finish Fire and Blood before we podcast. I'm about halfway through right now. I'm pretty close to the blacks and greens chapter, so I'll at least try to make it through the blacks and the greens. But we will be looking at season 2 of House of the Dragon, diving into the 8 episodes and our hopes and expectations for the 3rd season, which will appear sometime between 2026 and eternity. So based on HBO's production schedule. So that'll be something fun to look forward to. But until then, be careful. If a crow offers you a chance to come back and cut people up with a katana sword, you can do it as long as Rupert Sanders isn't involved. I think that's our general takeaway from this week's episode. But until next week, we will see you guys at the movies.